I knew something was up the moment I saw the mail truck parked at the end of my driveway like it hit a wall. It wasn't broken down, it wasn't delivering anything, it was just stuck. Then I saw her. Nancy Hillman, head of our HOA and the queen of petty power trips, standing in front of it with her arms crossed like she was guarding Fort Knox. Now, I'm not the kind of guy who looks for drama. I'm a mechanic. My name's Fletcher Andrews. I keep to myself, keep my lawn trimmed, and pay my dues, unfortunately. But when someone starts messing with my mail, that's where I draw the line. Move, Nancy. You can't block a federal vehicle, I said as I walked down my driveway. She turned on her heel so fast it was like she'd been waiting for me. This truck is trespassing, Fletcher. It's not authorized to use HOA-maintained roads without approval. I blinked. It's the United States Postal Service. You think they need your permission to deliver mail? I've already filed a complaint, she said, ignoring me. Until we get clarification, I'm not letting this vehicle through. It's about principle. The poor mailman, a young guy who looked like he wanted to disappear into his seat, leaned out the window. Sir, I've got deliveries to make. She stepped in front of me when I turned onto the street. I can't move. Did you call your supervisor? I asked him. Yep. And they called someone else. I figured that meant the postal inspector, and if they were getting involved, things were about to get real. Within 20 minutes, a dark SUV pulled up behind the truck. Out stepped a woman in a navy blazer with a badge clipped to her belt. She looked at Nancy like she'd just interrupted national security. Ma'am, I'm Inspector Torres with the United States Postal Inspection Service. Are you the one obstructing this federal vehicle? Nancy didn't even flinch. This is private property. He's violating HOA policy. Inspector Torres narrowed her eyes. He's delivering federal mail. You're in violation of Title 18 U.S. Code Section 1701, obstruction of mail. That's a federal offense. Nancy scoffed. I'll speak with your supervisor. This is ridiculous. As if on cue, 2 police cruisers rolled up. One of the officers, a guy I'd seen around before, stepped out and waved to me. Fletcher, you okay? Was until this morning. They talked with Torres, who explained the situation. Nancy stood her ground, arms crossed, a smug look on her face like she thought she was untouchable. But then Torres pulled out her tablet and showed the officers something. One of the cops turned to Nancy. Ma'am, I need you to step away from the vehicle. I will not. He let out a sigh and radioed something in. Then you're under arrest for interfering with delivery of the U.S. mail. Nancy's face went pale. You can't arrest me, I'm the HOA president. Exactly why we're doing it, Torres said. You used your position to intimidate a federal worker. That's not just obstruction, that's abuse of authority. They cuffed her right there in the middle of the street. I looked at the mailman, who finally pulled forward and handed me my mail through the window. Thanks for your patience, he said. No problem, I replied. This neighborhood's been waiting a long time for someone to put Nancy in her place. And little did I know that was just the beginning. The morning after Nancy's impromptu arrest, the neighborhood was quieter than I'd ever heard it. No leaf blowers, no barking dogs, not even the usual shuffle of joggers gossiping on the sidewalks. It was like the whole block was holding its breath. Folks were peeking through curtains like they expected a SWAT team to rappel off the rooftops. I was under my carport, replacing the brake pads on a client's pickup, when my neighbor from 2 doors down, Greg, wandered over. He was usually the type to nod and keep walking, but this time he looked genuinely rattled. You hear about the emergency board meeting tonight? He asked. I slid out from under the truck and wiped my hands. Nope. Didn't think we even had a functioning board after last night. They're calling it a leadership continuity session, but word is they're trying to appoint a temporary president until Nancy's situation gets resolved. Resolved? I raised an eyebrow. She got hauled off for interfering with federal mail service. That's not like getting a parking ticket. Greg shifted awkwardly. Well, apparently her husband's already lawyered up. They think they can spin it into a misunderstanding. I let out a low chuckle. Sure. blocking a government vehicle and arguing with a postal inspector. Real easy to misunderstand that. He looked around before leaning in. There's more. I've been on the finance committee the past 2 years. Yesterday, before everything went down, Nancy asked me to start shredding archived records. Old invoices, duplicate receipts, stuff like that, said it was part of a digital cleanup. I stared at him. And you didn't think that was suspicious? I did. That's why I didn't do it. I boxed everything instead. You think this is connected? Greg, if she's in this deep already, she's not just blocking mail trucks for fun. Keep those records safe. He nodded and walked off, clearly unsettled. I went back to my tools, but I couldn't focus. If Nancy was covering her tracks, there was a reason, and it wasn't just about a mail truck. That night, the HOA met at the Community Rec Center. The crowd was bigger than usual. People who hadn't shown up in years were suddenly very interested in neighborhood politics. I got there early enough to get a seat near the front. Greg slipped in beside me, carrying a small file box. The remaining board members, Nancy's cronies, all of them sat stiffly at the long table up front. Ron, her vice president, cleared his throat like he was preparing for a courtroom drama. Given recent events and in light of President Hillman's temporary absence, he began, we're proposing that I, as vice president, assume her duties until she is able to resume them. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. One woman in the back straightened in her seat. You mean until she gets out of jail? Ron's jaw twitched. We believe in due process. This board stands by Nancy until the situation has been legally clarified. I stood up. You mean you're hoping she walks without consequence? Because if what she did yesterday wasn't enough to disqualify her, then what's the threshold? A few others nodded. Someone clapped. Ron tried to wave it off. Let's keep this civil. Greg raised the box. How about we keep it legal? He set it on the table with a thud. These are financial records Nancy asked me to destroy yesterday. I didn't. And I think they're worth reviewing before we hand the keys to her second in command. Ron's face lost color. That's confidential material. You can't just share that here. Actually, came a voice from the back, you absolutely can. Everyone turned. Inspector Torres stepped forward, flanked by a man in plain clothes with a badge hanging from his belt, clearly not local law enforcement. This is Agent Darden. IRS Criminal Investigations, she announced. We received a call this afternoon regarding potential financial misconduct within this HOA. Given yesterday's events, we decided to pay a visit. Ron stammered. This is a private meeting. Not anymore, Agent Darden said. We've already obtained a subpoena for financial records. Mr. Gregson will take that box. Greg handed it over without a word. Torres addressed the crowd. HOAs are supposed to serve communities, not exploit them. What we're seeing here appears to be a pattern of misusing funds, falsifying expense reports, and pressuring board members to destroy records. That's fraud, folks, and it's a felony. People started whispering. A woman near the door stood up. I knew something was off when our landscaping budget doubled last year. Nothing changed. Another man added, and those special assessments for security upgrades? I never saw a single camera installed. Darden was already flipping through one of the ledgers. Looks like a lot of checks were written to shell contractors, companies that don't exist outside of a P.O. box or a disconnected phone number. Ron's voice cracked. We were told those were approved vendors. By whom? Torres asked. He didn't answer. They didn't arrest Ron on the spot, but they didn't have to. His silence said enough. People began shouting questions. A few neighbors demanded a full audit. One woman demanded refunds. The board called for a recess, but nobody left their seats. Back home, I pulled out the security footage from my door cam. I'd saved the entire encounter from the day before, including audio of Nancy confronting the mailman. I emailed it to Inspector Torres, just in case they needed it. The next morning, a notice was taped to every mailbox in the neighborhood. It wasn't from the board. It was from the city clerk's office. A section of the notice stood out in bold, effective immediately. All HOA financial operations are frozen pending a full forensic audit. City oversight will remain in place until a lawful and democratically elected board is established. A few hours later, a moving van pulled into Nancy's driveway. Her husband supervised two guys loading up boxes, furniture, and a few pieces of art. No one came out to say goodbye. No one waved. By sunset, they were gone. I stood in my driveway watching the van rumble away. Greg walked over holding two cold beers. He handed me one without a word. We clinked bottles, and for the first time in years, the neighborhood actually felt like ours again. By the end of the week, things at Maple Hollow were unraveling faster than anyone could keep up with. Most of the neighborhood still didn't know the full scope of what was happening behind the scenes, but I did, and it was uglier than I ever imagined. Greg had been keeping in touch with Agent Darden, who'd returned with a small team of forensic accountants. They weren't subtle about it either. Laptops were set up at the community rec center, and several file boxes had been carted in by plainclothes agents. The blinds were drawn, but every time I passed by, I could see the glow of spreadsheets on screen and hear the low hum of discussion. The audit had triggered a mandatory city inspection of HOA contracts. That's when things took a darker turn. One afternoon, I was under the hood of a Chevy Suburban when my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize, but I picked up anyway. Fletcher Andrews, speaking. This is Detective Harlan with the County Financial Crimes Division. I understand you've been involved with the situation in Maple Hollow. Sure, I've been helping where I can. What's going on? We've come across something we need to verify with you in person. Are you available this afternoon? I agreed to meet him at the precinct. When I arrived, I was led into a small office where Harlan, a tall man with a buzz cut and a clipboard, gestured for me to sit. We've been reviewing documentation recovered from the HOA's internal server, he started. Several contracts, payments, and emails. We've come across a string of invoices tied to a company named Larkspur Community Management. Never heard of it. That's what we figured. It doesn't exist outside of a paper trail, no website, no registered address. But according to the HOA's books, they've paid Larkspur nearly $280,000 over the last 3 years. My stomach dropped. And you think Nancy had something to do with it? Harlan nodded. We believe Larkspur was a shell company created to funnel funds. The payments were issued under the guise of consulting fees and planning services. The signature authorizing them matches Nancy Hillman's. Have you talked to her attorney? She's been advised not to speak. But here's where you come in. We found your name in an email chain dated 8 months ago. Nancy forwarded pictures of your property to someone using the Larkspur email address, along with the message, "Still won't sign. Might need to apply pressure." I leaned back. Pressure for what? That's what we were hoping you could tell us, I thought back. Around that time, Nancy had sent out a proposal to annex 3 adjacent lots into a greenbelt project. One of them was mine. When I refused to grant access for surveyors, she suddenly hit me with a dozen code violations. All petty fence height, tool storage, even the shade of my garage door. I told Harlan everything. He scribbled notes as I spoke, then flipped open a folder and slid a printed email across the table. It was from Nancy to the same Larkspur address, timestamped 2 days after I'd refused her request. See if we can run a lien on him. Use the landscaping clause. They tried to bury me in fines, I muttered. We've confirmed at least 6 other residents were targeted the same way. 3 of them eventually sold below market value. Guess who bought those homes? Don't tell me Larkspur. Technically, yes. But when we traced ownership, the paper trail ends at a private trust. That's when we called in the state's white-collar crimes bureau. I blinked. So this goes beyond the HOA, he nodded. Way beyond. We believe Nancy and at least 2 other board members were using the HOA as a front to drive down property values, then buy up homes through a shell company homes they'd later flip or rent out. I sat there in stunned silence. You're telling me they weaponized the HOA to run a real estate scam in their own neighborhood? And they were good at it. Until you stopped the mail truck. By the time I got home, the news had already broken. A regional news van was parked near the front entrance of the neighborhood, and a reporter was speaking into a mic while pointing toward the rec center. I walked right past them and headed to Greg's place. He opened the door before I even knocked. "You saw the news?" he asked. "Just came from the precinct. They showed me documents. Nancy wasn't just corrupt, she was running a full-on fraud operation." He stepped aside and motioned me in. "You better come take a look at this." In his living room, his wife had her laptop open. On the screen was a live feed of the city council's emergency session. Apparently, the story had made enough noise to trigger immediate action. One of the council members was speaking. "The city has received credible evidence of organized financial misconduct within the Maple Hollow HOA. As such, we are voting to dissolve the current board and place the neighborhood under temporary municipal administration." Another member spoke next. "Furthermore, we're coordinating with the district attorney's office to pursue criminal charges against all parties involved. Residents are advised to cooperate with investigators." Greg leaned forward. "That's not all. Darden called me earlier. 3 of the board members tried to withdraw HOA funds yesterday. The bank flagged it. Let me guess, they're about to disappear. Too late. They're already in custody." I let out a long breath. "That's 4 arrested in 1 week. Greg turned the screen toward me. "Make that 5. Sure enough, the news anchor was now reporting that Nancy herself had been denied bail. The judge cited risk of flight and potential destruction of evidence. Apparently, when agents searched her home, they found a hidden external drive with encrypted backups of financial records. She'd been preparing to wipe it clean, but she'd waited too long. The next day, a town hall was held at the city courthouse. Residents were bussed in, and city officials set up a microphone so each of us could speak. I wasn't planning to say anything, but when I saw the vacant seats where the board used to sit, something in me shifted. When my turn came, I stepped up to the mic and scanned the crowd. Most of us moved to Maple Hollow because it felt safe. Clean streets, good neighbors, a promise of order. We paid our dues, followed the rules, trusted the board to act in our interest. But behind those rules, there was something rotten. A few people nodded, others leaned forward. They used our trust to manipulate us. They created fake companies, bullied homeowners, and stole hundreds of thousands of dollars, not just in money but in peace of mind. I paused. But here's the thing. They didn't count on people watching. They didn't count on anyone standing up. They thought we'd stay quiet, that we wouldn't dig, that we'd just pay the fines and move on. I glanced at Greg. They were wrong. The room erupted in applause. 2 weeks later, a new committee was formed, not a board, not yet, but a temporary group of residents tasked with rebuilding. Greg was on it. So was a retired judge who lived near the cul-de-sac. They brought in a third-party management company with no ties to the old regime and opened the books to every homeowner. The first town cleanup was scheduled for Saturday. Not the kind with rakes and trash, bags, the kind with open records, public questions, and a promise of transparency. That morning, I stepped out of my house and saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. Neighbors smiling, chatting, waving at each other without suspicion. Kids rode bikes down the street without dodging clipboard-wielding board members. The mail truck rolled through like it belonged there. And this time, nobody blocked it. A week after the city dissolved the HOA board, Maple Hollow finally started breathing again. For the first time in years, people were organizing because they wanted to, not because someone had threatened them with a violation. But the more we peeled back the layers of what Nancy and her crew had done, the more we realized we'd only seen the surface. That Friday morning, just after sunrise, Greg showed up at my garage with a manila envelope and 2 cups of coffee. He didn't say anything right away. Just held out the envelope. I wiped my hands on a rag, took it, and opened the flap. Inside were copies of 3 notarized letters, all dated within the last year. Each was from a different homeowner. Each one had the same phrase typed neatly at the bottom. In protest of the unlawful lien placed against my property, I am requesting an independent review of HOA records. I looked up. Where'd you get these? They were buried in the rec center's storage closet, behind a false wall panel. City inspectors found them this morning when they went to install the new fire alarm system. I flipped through the copies again. These folks ever get a response? Greg shook his head. No, and all three of them ended up losing their homes within 6 months of sending the letters. Let me guess. They couldn't pay the fines. They tried to fight them, but every time they did, more fees got tacked on. Late penalties, enforcement costs, administrative processing. 2 of them eventually declared bankruptcy. I set the papers down. They starved them out. And we think that's just the beginning, Greg said. The city's forensic team found a second set of books on a flash drive hidden behind ductwork in the old boardroom. None of the entries match the official records. Off-the-books income, more like off-the-books extortion. They were charging people to remove violations. As in, actual cash payments untraceable made in exchange for destroying complaint forms before they were filed. I took a deep breath and leaned against the workbench. How many people paid up? Too early to tell. But from what the analysts can piece together, there were at least 20 homeowners who handed over money directly to board members. One guy left an envelope taped under a trash bin behind the tennis courts. And the cops have all this now. They're building a new case separate from the fraud charges, this time for racketeering. That word hung in the air like a storm cloud. We both understood what it meant. If proven, it wouldn't just be a local scandal. It would fall under federal jurisdiction. Later that afternoon, the city held a press event on the steps of the courthouse. The district attorney stood beside the state attorney general, both of them flanked by suits and badges. No one from Maple Hollow had ever seen that much law enforcement in one place without a siren blaring. I watched from the back of the crowd as the attorney general stepped up to the podium. For years, the Maple Hollow HOA operated under the guise of structure and community service. But what we've uncovered is a layered scheme of financial manipulation, coercion, and illegal property acquisition that extends beyond city limits. This is no longer a matter of mismanagement. It is a matter of organized criminal activity. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Effective immediately, she continued. Our office is filing charges under the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act. We are naming Nancy Hillman, Ronald Vexley, Judith Lorne, and Michael Padraic as primary defendants. Additional charges are forthcoming for 4 other individuals involved in the operation of fraudulent LLCs and property laundering. I turned to Greg. They're going full RICO, he nodded grimly. They've got the timeline, they've got the paper trail, and they've got witness statements. This isn't going away. The news spread fast. By sundown, every major media outlet had picked up the story. One of the local channels even broadcasted a segment showing drone footage of Nancy's former house being searched by federal agents. Boxes were carried out. A safe was wheeled down the driveway. The anchor mentioned that investigators had found over $200,000 in cash and several fake IDs. That night, I got a knock on my door just before midnight. It was Officer Harrington, the same guy who'd responded when Nancy blocked the mail truck. "Got a minute?" he asked. "Sure. Everything okay?" He stepped inside and handed me a document stamped with the county seal. "We're compiling testimonies from residents who were specifically targeted. Your name's on the list. DA's office is requesting an official statement." I read the page. It was a formal subpoena to appear before the grand jury. "Happy to talk," I said. "I've got records, video, emails," he nodded. "That's why they want you. You're the guy who started the whole thing when you stood up to her in the street." I thought about that moment. It felt like a year ago. I never imagined refusing to be bullied that morning would turn into all this. "Thanks, Harrington." He gave a tired half smile and left. The following Thursday, I sat in a wood-paneled chamber and answered questions for nearly an hour. The assistant DA was sharp, methodical, and didn't waste time. Did you ever receive a fine you believed was retaliatory? Yes. Shortly after refusing access to my property for a proposed greenbelt expansion. Were the violations justified? No, one of them was for a non-existent garden shed. I never had one. Did you ever pay to have a violation removed? No, but I was offered the option verbally by Judith Lorne. She said it would expedite the process if I made a goodwill contribution. Did she specify an amount, $100, in cash? The grand jurors took notes. No one interrupted. When it was over, I was dismissed with a quiet thank you and a firm handshake. Over the next few weeks, more residents were called to testify. Some did so reluctantly, others with fire in their eyes. One woman, a single mom named Rachel whose home had nearly gone into foreclosure, broke down halfway through her statement. She'd borrowed from her retirement just to cover the fines Nancy kept stacking onto her. The jury handed down an indictment within 3 days. All 8 individuals named in the case were arrested. The charges included conspiracy to commit fraud, extortion, falsifying financial records, money laundering, and racketeering. Bail was denied across the board. The city moved quickly to implement reforms. A new ordinance was passed requiring all HOAs within city limits to submit quarterly financial reports to an independent oversight committee. Any association found to be charging residents without documented cause would face automatic state audit. Maple Hollow was placed under a state-appointed administrator until new elections could be held. The administrator, a retired ethics auditor named Linda Mendoza, called a general assembly in the community park. She stood on a folding chair and addressed the crowd without a microphone. "This neighborhood's been through hell, but you're still standing, and that means something. From now on, no one gets to make decisions in the dark. Everything we do will be posted publicly, voted on openly, and tracked by people who don't answer to anyone except you." The applause was deafening. A month later, we held the first fully transparent election Maple Hollow had ever seen. Candidates were required to disclose any business relationships, and every ballot was audited by 2 independent monitors. Greg was elected president. Rachel, now back on her feet, was voted in as treasurer. And me? I agreed to serve as head of community maintenance, mostly because I knew how to fix just about anything, and people trusted me to keep things running without politics. On the morning of our first official meeting, I stood at the edge of the greenbelt, the real one, not the fake expansion Nancy tried to force, and watched a group of kids racing their bikes down the walking path. One of them waved as they passed. Greg joined me, holding a clipboard and a cup of coffee. "Never thought we'd make it here," he said. "Neither did I. You think they'll actually serve time?" "They will," I said. "This wasn't just about money. They stole people's homes, lives, futures. And they did it with a smile." He nodded slowly. "Well, not anymore." We walked back toward the rec center where the new board waited beneath a handmade banner that read, "Welcome to the new Maple Hollow. No suits, no scripts, just neighbors finally in charge of their own neighborhood." And not a clipboard in sight.